This is a revision video for AQA GCSE Chemistry or Combined Science, Unit 7, Organic Chemistry. Remember, 40% of the marks in your GCSE Science are for pure factual recall, so this is a summary video so that you can check that you've memorised all of the key points from the specification, and then once you know these you can go on to do other questions which ask you to apply that knowledge or to analyse data. Finite means that something is running out faster than we can replace it. Crude oil is an example of a finite resource, and it comes from the remains of ancient biomass, mainly plankton, which have been buried in mud. Crude oil is a fossil fuel. It's finite and it's running out. And most of the molecules in crude oil are hydrocarbons, which are compounds that are made just from hydrogen and carbon. Most of those hydrocarbons belong to a homologous series called alkanes. The general formula for alkanes is CnH2n plus 2. So that means that for any alkane molecule, I'd expect there to be twice as much hydrogen as carbon atoms, plus another 2. The first four members of the alkanes are methane, ethane, propane and butane, and all of these molecules contain single covalent bonds. Ethane, being the second alkane, has 2 carbon atoms, and then as we know, every carbon atom can make 4 strong covalent bonds, so there's 1 bond between the 2 carbons, and then each carbon is bonded to 3 hydrogens. The alkane that contains 10 carbon atoms will have the formula C10H22, so you can see we're using that formula CnH2n plus 2. And the formula of the alkane containing 26 hydrogen atoms will be C12H26. The purpose of fractional distillation is to separate mixtures of either liquids or gases so that they can be used for different uses. So one example of this is the fractional distillation of crude oil. A fraction is just a name we give to a group of chemicals that have similar boiling points, so when we do fractional distillation they'll be collected together. The two main uses of fractions of crude oil are as fuels and as feedstocks for the petrochemical industry. A feedstock is just a starting chemical that we're going to use to make other things. The 5 fractions of crude oil named in your specification are petrol, diesel oil, kerosene, heavy fuel oil and LPG, or liquefied petroleum gas. You might have also heard of some other ones like naphtha or bitumen, and it's fine if you want to talk about those, but these are the 5 that are named that you do need to know. The petrochemical industry is responsible for making solvents, lubricants, polymers, detergents, and obviously we have mentioned fuels, although that's not mentioned in this part of the specification. In order to do fractional distillation, the crude oil is heated to about 350 degrees C. You'll see some textbooks will talk about 400 or 450. There isn't a precise temperature that you're meant to know, but you just need to know that it's very, very hot. Most of the hydrocarbons are then going to evaporate, although the bitumen or residue probably won't. The fractionating column has a temperature gradient, which means that at the bottom, close to the furnace, it's incredibly hot, but at the top it may be as cool as maybe 40 degrees C. The larger fractions of hydrocarbons have higher boiling points. As the fractions rise up because they've evaporated, they've become gases, and the temperature falls below their boiling points, the fractions are going to condense and then they can be extracted. The fractions that are extracted at the top of the fractionating column are smaller hydrocarbons, and they have lower boiling points because the intermolecular forces between the molecules are weaker. They're less viscous, which means they're less sticky, and they're more flammable, so they make better fuels because they burn more cleanly. Combustion is just another name for burning in oxygen, and if you completely combust something, that means reacting it with as much oxygen as it could possibly react with. So if you completely combust an alkane, which of course is a hydrocarbon, the carbon makes carbon dioxide and the hydrogen from that hydrocarbon makes water. Propane is the third alkane, so its formula is C3H8, and when it reacts with oxygen it will make 3 carbon dioxide molecules because there are 3 carbons in the propane. And it will make 4 water molecules because there are 8 hydrogens and each water molecule contains 2 of them. Then if I add all of that up, I see that I'm going to need in total 5 oxygen molecules to make that balance. If I incompletely combust an alkane, so when I react it with not quite enough oxygen, then instead of making carbon dioxide, I'm going to make carbon monoxide and still some water, but there may also be some carbon particulates. So this could be carbon that hasn't reacted with anything, or even very small hydrocarbon molecules. Cracking is a thermal decomposition reaction, so a reaction that uses heat to break apart a compound, and it's specifically the thermal decomposition of alkanes. And generally we crack the very large alkanes like bitumen. The reason for this is because we have more of these large alkanes than we know what to do with, whereas the small ones are very good fuels and we would like more, but we don't have enough. When you crack an alkane, you make a smaller alkane and also one or more alkenes, these little hydrocarbon molecules that have a carbon-carbon double bond in them. The two types of cracking we need to know about for GCSE chemistry are catalytic cracking and steam cracking. In catalytic cracking, we use a zeolite catalyst, so that could be aluminium oxide or silica dioxide, and a high temperature. There's not high pressure. The pressure involved in cracking is often only about 2 atmospheres. You can do catalytic cracking right in your classroom, and you probably use some broken up plant pot as your zeolite catalyst. For steam cracking, we use steam and an even higher temperature. The test for alkenes is that orange bromine water will turn colourless, and it's really important that you say colourless, not clear. Clear will not get you the mark. And these alkenes are used to make plastics when they're polymerised, or they can be hydrated to make alcohols. The general formula for an alkene is CnH2n, so every alkene contains twice as many hydrogen atoms as carbon atoms. And alkenes are described as unsaturated because they contain a carbon-carbon double bond. Now, it's important when you're drawing them that you're aware that there's usually going to be one carbon-carbon double bond. At least at GCSE, that's all we're going to see. Sometimes you see people drawing alkenes and they think that every pair of carbons is joined by a double bond, and that's not the case. The first 4 alkenes are ethene, propene, butene, and pentene. There's no methene because you can't have a carbon-carbon double bond when you only have one carbon atom. Butene looks a bit like this, so as you can see, we've got our 4 carbons, but there's only a double bond between one pair of them. So you could have that double bond on the left or the right instead, it doesn't have to be in the middle, but the important thing is there is only one double bond. And the functional group of alkenes is that carbon-carbon double bond. That's the group of atoms that gives them their characteristic chemistry. When alkenes react with oxygen, alcohols are used as solvents, fuels, and ethanol specifically is found in alcoholic beverages. That's what makes them alcoholic. Ethanol can be made when yeast is used to ferment glucose, but any alcohol can be made by the hydration of alkenes using steam. A carboxylic acid has a functional group which is COOH. The first 4 carboxylic acids are methanoic acid, ethanoic acid, propanoic acid, and butanoic acid. And butanoic acid looks like this. So you can see here the functional group slightly more clearly. It involves a carbon atom double bonded to an oxygen atom, and then also single bonded to a second oxygen atom, which is in turn bonded to a hydrogen atom. When ethanoic acid, or indeed any carboxylic acid, reacts with a carbonate, it will release or evolve some carbon dioxide, and we could then test and prove that this is carbon dioxide using lime water, which will obviously go white as it produces a white precipitate, which makes it go sort of cloudy and milky. Carboxylic acids and alcohols react together to make esters, and the particular one formed when ethanoic acid reacts with ethanol is called ethyl ethanoate. That's the only example of an ester that you need to be able to name. When ethanoic acid is added to water, it's going to dissolve and release some hydrogen ions to make a weakly acidic solution. Carboxylic acids are called weak acids because although they dissolve to make an acidic solution, not every single molecule is going to completely ionise. So because they incompletely ionise, only some of the molecules release their hydrogen ions, and that's therefore going to lead to a solution that has a slightly higher pH than a strong acid like hydrochloric acid, where every particle would completely ionise. A polymer is a very long chain of repeating units called monomers that have been joined by covalent bonds. And the name of the polymer made when we polymerise ethene is polyethene. There are two types of polymerization that you need to know about: addition polymerization and condensation polymerization. In addition polymerization, the monomers are all going to contain a double bond. And because every atom in the monomer ends up in the polymer for addition polymerization, the number of atoms in the polymer and the monomer is going to be exactly the same. Polypropene is going to have a repeating unit that looks like this. Now pay attention to the fact that this is the repeating unit, not the monomer. So it doesn't have the double bond in the middle, that double bond has broken, and instead each of those carbon atoms can form another covalent bond with an atom that we can't see in this picture. A condensation polymer forms when the monomers react and a small molecule is lost, and that small molecule could, for instance, be water. Polyesters are an example of a condensation polymer, and they're made when a diol, so that's an alcohol where it's got an OH group at both ends of the molecule, so di means two, and a dioic acid, so that's a carboxylic acid which has carboxylic acid groups at both ends of the molecule, polymerize and water molecules are lost. Four examples of naturally occurring polymers are DNA, protein, starch, and cellulose. An amino acid is the small molecule that proteins are broken down into. Here's an example of an amino acid. This is called glycine. So all amino acids are going to look a little bit like this. They're going to have the nitrogen atom bonded to two hydrogen atoms on one side and a carboxylic acid group on the other side. There'll be a hydrogen to the top of the carbon, and then that central carbon can also be bonded to just about anything else. So this example, where the central carbon is bonded to a second hydrogen atom, is called glycine. When amino acids polymerize, they make polypeptides, and those polypeptide chains could be joined up with other polypeptide chains or folded into a particular shape to make proteins. DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid, and the point of DNA is that it encodes genetic instructions for the development and functioning of living organisms and viruses. So each gene, each section of DNA is going to code for a particular protein that an organism needs to make. DNA is a double helix. It contains two polymer chains which are twisted together in a sort of helter-skelter staircase, and they're made out of four complementary nucleotides: adenine, cytosine, guanine, and thymine. The final two naturally occurring polymers you need to know about are starch and cellulose, and both of those are made from glucose. So the glucose is just joined together in slightly different ways to make a different polymer, but they both have the same starting monomer. I hope that was helpful. Don't forget to subscribe.